Good morning and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bonds, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Maria, who is CEO of Wallife. Good morning, Maria. How are you?
Thank you, Alex. I'm very well. Thank you.
Good, good. We're going to have some funny footage to share actually beforehand that we recorded, because what people don't know that are listening in is what an absolute circus we've both made of getting lighting right. I said I'm recording from a cinema, which is a really terrible place to record it, and it sounds really fancy, but it's very small and badly lit cinema, which isn't good for this. But anyway, I digress. Really excited to speak to you today. I met one of your team, ITI in New York. Fascinated by the story that you guys have got. Before I make a bad job of explaining what Wallife do, Maria, it'd be wonderful if you could introduce yourself and the Wallife business.
For sure, Alex. Thank you very much. Wallife is a startup and is an insurtech startup. So what we do, the core of what we do, our mission is to identify new risks which might be associated and generated by either new technologies or scientific progress. We came to this conclusion that technology is speeding up. It's so fast and is accelerating every day. So we have new applications every day in our hands or on our phones. But what we don't have is enough time to look at what are the risks associated with those technology. There is no time, and therefore there is, always the risk behind the corner that we might have some downside scenario and we're not protected. So this is what the core of what Wallife does.
Okay, amazing. And I think that's like thematically, that's where sort of insurtech appears to be going. If we talk about the different phase of insurtech, and a lot of it was really focused on distribution, but the stuff that I'm really excited about is looking at all these kind of emerging risks, genuinely emerging risks that we were unaware of, and even some of the kind of just products we were unaware of. I mean, like Gaia is a really good example, like fertility treatment, and an insurable kind of risk involved in that. No one had kind of seen that, but there seems to be a lot of excitement. But at Wallife, you appear to have like taken a bigger challenge in sort of going, right, we're gonna. How does it work in practical terms? Because I sort of understand the mission, but it's almost like you're running an R&D lab for new risks in the insurance space. But then do you operate as an MGA? What's the kind of like business model from that perspective?
Yeah, we do operate as an MGA from a technical perspective. So we're not a full stack insurance business. This is at least the starting point, because we really want to be focused on the product innovation side, as you said. And it's not an easy mission because, you have a lot of things going on and you are sometimes a little tempted to chase something that is cool and maybe, that is, yeah, exactly. And it's trendy, but we don't chase scientific speculation. We trust and rely on data. So what we do, the first thing that we do is to have a quite broad and deep preliminary data analysis on what are really the risks associated with certain applications. And before we go on to the next stage, which is deep dive on those technologies and really understand what are the risks and the use cases. But one thing that is important is that we have an internal team, an innovation team, like a lab, what you just said. But we also realized we cannot be expert on everything, right? It's impossible. There's so many things. So what we do is that we partner with technology providers or scientific teams or universities, for example. So after we realize that there is something interesting to explore in one of the area that we want to research on, then we go deep dive and we find the right partner to be specific, right? To be like specialist of that specific application. So in a sense, it's a sort of an open innovation type of process that we still obviously, improving and fine tuning. But I think this is really the core of our research part. And this is how we get interested in trends, which are maybe today they're niche, maybe today they're small, or they're very small perceived, but tomorrow they might explode and become a big trend.
I think it's such a fascinating model, and I hate to make it all about capacity, but I'm really interested about how that capacity relationship works, because normally if you were running an MGA, you'd come up with a very specific product or set of products that are related to each other, and then you propose that to an insurer and they might provide capacity. But you're essentially I presume you've got a sort of more open capacity relationship, and you're saying, we'll come up with some products. We don't know what they are yet, but we're going to come up with some products. How does that work from a capacity arrangement?
Yeah, believe me, that challenge was first with investors, but we're going to talk about this later,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to say, we had an amazing roadmap, but we don't know exactly which products we're going to have. So that was a challenge too. So to your point, is a challenge from a capacity perspective. So we really have to look for partners which are open-minded and really embrace product innovation. What I think we find very interesting is, we never received like a no-go. Like every risk carrier we interviewed for partnering with us was genuinely interested in what we're doing. Some people or some firms are more risk adverse, or they would like to see some traction before they actually commit. Some others are more, inclined to really, support our exploration, let's say, on product innovation. So, but effectively, we bring in new business. So I think that this is really the key point, right? We're not cannibalizing with any other business because it's new products, and therefore the opportunity to really sell more products to the same customer base might be appealing. So that's how we get engaged.
Yeah. It comes back to the collaboration aspect, doesn't it? Which obviously is there with all capacity relationships, but I think it's a really interesting proposition of almost externalizing some of the product innovation, and it's interesting to see. Yeah, I'd like to be a fly on the wall of those conversations about who sees this as a really positive approach, and which insurers and carriers are a little bit slower to get on board. I wanted to, I've started by ignoring all of the questions, which is something that I've started to do. So I'm gonna go back to them and behave myself and stick to the script a little bit. So I did want to know how you stay ahead of insuring against emerging and unknown risks, because there's lots of people really trying to look at this, but what's your main challenge of sort of being ahead of things like genetic manipulation, biohacking? Yeah, what are the sort of main challenges you focus when trying to get ahead of the curve on these risks?
Yeah, so let me first remind what are the three key research areas we're investigating at the moment at the stage. One is, as you said, is genetics, so the protection of the biological identity. The second one is the biometric, which means basically the protection of your digital identity, because we have a lot of biometric credentials in our life today. And then the third one is what we call biohacking. It specifically is technology connected to healthcare. It can be in your body or outside your body, but will transmit and, let's say, process health data, which are very important for all of us. So one of the challenges we have, sometimes we struggle to find partners to deep dive on some of those risks, let's say use cases. And the reason for that is because somebody might think that by sharing the risks they face, for example, within their technology, might look like a little bit of a weakness, and therefore they are less inclined to share. But I'll give you a specific example, which is one of our main area of research, which is a connected technology for healthcare. It's called Internet of Medical Things, and it's a huge trend. By 2026, the forecast is that we're going to have 7 million devices connected. And as you can appreciate, anything that is connected to a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth is in danger, right? Has a vulnerability. So we would like to partner, for example, with technology providers or clinical hospitals, whoever is handling those devices, to really understand what are the use cases, what are the risks. And there is a data which we cannot ignore, which the number of incident and data breach in the healthcare system is huge. We found research that said that 24 million health records have been exposed somehow to hackers and scammers. So there is a potential risk there, but I think it's a little bit difficult and challenging to find somebody who would openly share with us data and the vulnerability and the weaknesses, which I find a little short-sighted, because what we can do is actually to increase and mitigate those risks, and also to protect individuals so that they can really embrace technology without the fear, right, of being hacked or being vulnerable. So I think for user will be way better that somebody will look into those risks and find solutions, as opposed to don't look at all and pretend everything is totally fine. You know? So that's the challenge.
But that, I think that's a broad challenge, isn't it? With I think generally speaking, emerging risks, because I think the default setting of just human beings is to kind of ignore it and hope it goes away. You know, it's like finding, you know, it's like the first kind of stages of being unwell. You kind of go, I'm sure it'll be fine, in 48 hours later, and then 48 hours later, half your legs hanging off and you have to go to the hospital. But you know, it's that kind of ignore it, hope it goes away. But I can see that, because it's kind of, it's allowing the businesses to be vulnerable. It's a risk, even it's a reputational risk in kind of admitting that there is the challenge there. So yeah, I can understand how that's a huge challenge. We talk about innovation a lot on the podcast as a sort of big part of what we look at. And when you're insuring unknown risks, innovation is clearly imperative to what you do. How do you go about building a team? I wanted to kind of understand about the team that you've got there, how you build a team, and how you build a sort of culture that fosters innovation.
This is a very important question to me, because we come from innovation. Our background as a team was always like about innovative companies. I was personally, CFO at companies which I would say they were disruptors in a sense in their respective segment of the market. So we do care innovation a lot. And there is not the right recipe. It's very complicated, like to get the right team, the right approach, the right process. We tried many things in my career, tried many different, I would say, model, but there is not a perfect solution. It's probably more tailor-made. It's perfect. It can be right in a certain stage of the company. It can be wrong in a different stage, if you know what I mean. But one key thing that I found common across all the experiences and the trial we've been exploring is definitely to have a diverse team. And when I say diverse, I'm a woman CEO, so it might be easy for me to just say, diverse means equal, feminine and masculine. But the reality is that there is so much more about diversity. We, for example, at Wallife, we do care a lot about age diversity. And the reason for that is because if you want to really bring to market something new, you have to be able to talk to a broader audience, right? You cannot just see the world on one perspective only. It would be really not in line with our mission of, let's say, boosting awareness around risks. So risks are perceived in different ways from, a younger consumer versus an older consumer. And especially when it's about technology related risks, for a young consumer might be completely different. So this is why we have a team, we're building a team which really ranges between 18 years old to 70 years old. And we have a team which brings to the table different perspective, different view to use technology, maybe different use cases and applications of the same technology. And this is how we learn and we test ourselves some of the risk and perspectives. So that's a very interesting experiment, I would say, that we're carrying on.
Yeah, that the age diversity thing, I think, is a really important point. I think it's something that we've been quite bad at in insurance. I've always kind of felt that we've lost people from the industry, and we haven't always passed that knowledge on. The sort of knowledge transfer has been quite weak. I'm a big fan of kind of pairing like people at the sort of later stage of their career with people at the early stage of their career for that knowledge transfer. But some around startups I think it's a super important point. I mean, we talk about startups being, looking a bit like me. There's sort of people that get funding, like white middle-aged guys that tend to get over sort of indexed in terms of funding. But then actually, if you look at the teams that people put together, they're very similar in age. And, there's this kind of thing of people being innovative at the earlier stage of their career. And there's a truism of that. I think you are a bit more open typically. but that's such a blanket statement, and also it kind of doesn't allow you to bring all the knowledge sets that you need, because people that are from different industries at different stages of it's, and as you say, they look at risks in a different way. Your perception of risk is different, and so I think it's a really important point, and something that I don't see other startups addressing at all.
Yeah, I have to tell you, it's so, I'd say I'm learning so much from 18 years old, you know, people, because they use different technologies, or they use it in a different way. So if you look at my phone and the phone of an 18 years old person will be totally different applications, different way to different styles. So it's so important. And quite frankly, you have to, come visit us once, but it's also very, I would say, culturally and intellectually interesting, because you can really put together in a room people with different backgrounds and different ages. And it's not necessarily true that the 70 years old person will teach the 18 years old person. Sometimes it goes vice versa. And it's so fascinating. It's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because my colleague Sophie is just post university, and she just looks at things in a different way, and sometimes I'm really stuck in doing something, and it takes the person to go, well, why are you doing it like that, or are you aware of this new technology? Just even in my personal life, I'm slightly obsessed with the Be Reals, the new kind of social media app. I don't know if you've seen that, right? But
yes, I saw it.
But the uptake in people using that is much younger in profile, and it's really interesting. It's kind of like it's starting to take into case. So just the technology people use in their daily lives, so therefore their risk exposure is so different. And I wanted to ask you specifically about that, as we're talking about different age profiles, and like how important is it to consider different age ranges, diverse age range, when assessing risks that we're looking at?
Yeah, it's so for us, it's really core. So for example, back to the point I was making, like we look at data a lot. So we had a specific survey around, the perception of risks at different ages, different, demographic attributes. And it's not a surprise that obviously for in the range between 18 and 25 years old, users are more afraid, or let's say more concerned about social media, or being, for example, the profile being hacked, or the pictures being stolen, or reputation, for example, being, jeopardized. So this is for younger users. But when you move up to the 55-ish users, then it's about digital payments, and it's about the bank account, and it's about privacy. So it's a completely different set, and is the same technology, right? Because we're talking about the same, more or less the same technology. So it's the digital technology, but at the end of the day, they it's very different, the risk perceived by one or the other. What we found really surprising is that I thought that younger users will be more aware of risks and will be more, like, say, tech savvy. So that will be wiser in using technology and potentially less inclined to get trapped in a phishing attempt, or like they're smarter, right? So that's what I was thinking. Is actually not the case. The young consumer pool is, because they're using so many applications in social media, which is more vulnerable sometimes. So they tend to be actually a primary goal and target for hackers and scammers. So they tend to have a lot of, very high risk. And they're not necessarily the ones that they engage with more protections or cybersecurity best practices. So this is the point, right? It's a very important point for us. We learn from those surveys that we have to talk to young consumers and to more, I'd say, seasoned consumers in a completely different way. We have to boost awareness for both of the classes, but in a different way, because obviously for a young consumers will more relate to a reason with them more about, the social media and the, security of their profile, while for older consumers, we can, for example, talk about banking systems and fintech. So, and you can also think about using different communication tools, because they talk different languages. So that's a very important point of what we do.
That's really interesting, actually, because I think about the media, the role the media has to play in that. Because if you thought who was at risk from like phishing scams, you would assume it's just basically older people. It's like my parents. I worry about my parents for getting scammed all the time. I never worry about me getting scammed. And it's that kind of my exposure is so much higher because I use so much more technology. I mean, my parents are the people that just they turn their mobile phones off when they're at home because they're like, well, I'm at home. You phone the phone, you know, they're the home phone. And there's still that generation that they're not as engaged all times. Whereas I think about yeah, just the level of exposure. I mean, even in my own
Exactly.
life.
That's the point, right? That older people are less exposed. They use less technology.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's true when you're saying that they might be less expert, but they use less. So the risk is smaller. While the younger consumer, they use a lot. So,
yeah.
you know, the probability of getting some problems is just higher.
And it's that thing of I was watching this program about extreme sports, and there's a risk where they talked about free divers and people that free fall parachute jump a lot, and they said one of the risks is they get so used to doing it that apparently this happens with people that parachute is that they forget to pull the parachute cord just because they're so comfortable with the risk of jumping out of a plane that they forget to fall it, and it's one of the risks. It's overexposure to risk. So if you to think about people using technology so much at a young age, you are unaware of the risks because you're so comfortable using the technology. Whereas if that technology came into your life at a later generation, then you start with the kind of skepticism and you start from that point because it's new technology, and then so you're always going to hold a healthy respect for the risk, whereas if you're born into it, it's going to be very different. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how that profile changes. I want to change gears slightly. We touched on this earlier, actually, about funding, when we were talking about capacity, and you said that you had to walk VCs through the kind of model in a slightly different way. So, you know, you just raised a Series A. I think was it 12 million euros or was it
12 million euros? Yeah.
Yeah, 12 million euros, which is a pretty good round, especially in the current environment. So, you know, it's one of the largest funding rounds in the European insurtech space. So what was that journey like? Talk us through that kind of, was it challenging? Did people understand the model? What did you come up against in terms of challenges?
I have to say that, so one step back is, so we had a seed round before we closed it by August 2021. And that process was really, you know, was tapping into our network and so more like, I wouldn't call it family and friends, but more like a professional network and financial network. But what was very interesting is everybody, when we talk about those risks and we say, you know, have you ever thought about this and that? And what is fascinating is that everybody is in his life or maybe in his family had some exposure to those risks. And so, you know, the reaction you have is, oh, wow, yeah, I had a similar experience and I never thought an insurance coverage was available for those things. So it gets really personal in a sense when you give a pitch, because we're talking about our lives and we talk about things that we do every time, every day, hundreds of times a day, like opening your phone with your Face ID. That's something we do every day, right?
Yeah.
So this was the first seed round, and we really found a lot of people really embrace the mission. But obviously it was more related to, I would say, our broader network. So to see the validation of our idea by such a large round led by one of the primary Italian VC was really important to us, because this is not anymore about, you know, people who knows us or like us, but it was more about a financial and institutional investor, which really makes us feel this is a validation of our mission. The journey was very interesting because, to be honest, we always as soon as we started, we found very good chemistry with the VC that is the leader of this round. So we didn't scout for a lot of other leaders. We scout obviously for other institutional investors who also are joining this round. But I think what was very interesting is, to your point earlier, like a little bit the journey was to make sure it was clear that we would also waste time. Let's be honest. Like when you do research, it's not wasting time ever, because you're going to learn, you're going to put data on your storage, and you're going to learn how to do certain things. So, but we have to be aware that not all the explorations and scouting that we're going to fund, they're going to lead to a product. Sometimes that will not be product, right? Because maybe the risk is too high, maybe cannot be mitigated yet, maybe, it's, so there are risks that we're not going to be able to insure. And in this case, it's important that the investor will, really embrace that mission, because they have to be aware that there are certain things that would not be commercially viable. And this is exactly what we found. We found all our investors are really totally, I would say, signed up and committed to, fund also a pure research, I would say, part of the business. Of course, they also want to see some results, that's for sure. But I think this is the most important thing that we really want to make sure was clear, and we really want to make sure that, we were on the same page, if you know.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think I gave your fairly bad. I gave your colleague in New York quite a hard time about this, because I didn't get it to start with, because the balance that is exactly as you just said, is that, so you've got to research first, create insurance products second, but you don't have these kind of vanilla run-of-the-mill products that are making you money. So it's almost like you're running like an open innovation lab that an insurance company would do on its own. If I think of, like, George Beattie from Beazley, he runs the innovation side of Beasley's underwriting. They get to look at new products, but they're funded by the core business of Beazley, which is running the property casualty, all that. But you don't have that. So it's the balance of researching, but you need to generate products because they need to generate income. So how do you balance that? Or is it just making sure that you've got such a good team that you're going to come up with something? I'm intrigued about that sort of balance between driving consistent income versus constantly innovating.
This is a very important question to me, because this is also how we balance ourselves in terms of team. So the Wallife chairman, who is Fabio Bianchi, and is the founder as well of Wallife. He used to say that he is the, let's say, protector of the original idea, which is, really go scout for new risks, whether or not they're going to be, let's say, a big mass market event or not. But it's really more about finding what's the use case, what's the application, what's the data around those risks, and how we can mitigate and eventually, insure now or in the future. So he's a little bit the element that helps us to keep us, I would say, in balance, or away from, let's go just on the commercial and make money and have products that will sell forever. While I would say there is more, my role as a CEO is really to balance those two approach, right? So we have also, like, our first product, which is more about cybersecurity. Like, this is it's a protection for your biometric credentials, so basically your digital identity. And this is on the personal line side. It's not on the commercial, because we realize that the commercial line is actually failing to protect individuals. They're not going to give back money to the individuals who lost their data. They're going to just protect the business. And therefore, we think that there is a good segment of the market that can be approached by, taking the other side of the equation and making sure that individuals be protected as well. So this is, I would say, a product that can be, perceived and appreciated by consumers in the short term, and we're launching in September. But at the same time, we're scouting, and so we have to scout also for things which will take maybe 3-5 years to become a mass market. What is important is that we don't scout for things just because they're niche. We scout for risks which we believe that will become big in the future. So, like, they're a part of a trend which is increasing. And I'll give you a very specific example. Our second product that we are launching possibly by the end of this year, is the protection for your, the umbilical cord, so the stem cells that will be stored in a biobank. Now, this, you might think, okay, that's all for parents or future parents who would love to, store the umbilical cord of their children and have it in a biobank. But effectively, the progress in the scientific community is looking for additional applications for stem cells. So they might become a trend, which is not just for newborn, but it's also for adults. And so this is why we're investing time and resources on this one, because we think that this is going to become much bigger in the future with a wider application. So that's an example of how we mitigate, right? We have products which are, I would say, more closer to our daily life, and products which we think that will become closer to our daily life, maybe at some point in the future. And that's why we're investing on those
Yeah.
areas.
It's such an interesting model, because it's almost like you're building a portfolio, like a venture portfolio. You're venturing these kind of more run-of-the-mill risks that have a more instant application broadly, and then you've got, this could be a huge market, this stem cell, but you're right, we won't know for 3 to sort of 4 or 5 years. It's fascinating to me. I wanted to ask you about the impact of, because you've seen all the data, what was the impact when we shifted towards a much more remote world? Presumably the exposure's gone up dramatically. Is there any kind of, other than it going up, are there any kind of like trends that sort of happened that either surprised or interested you as a business?
Yeah, well, yes, for sure. I would say in general, the whole digital transformation trend, which started even before the pandemic, but brought a lot of new applications, like the one we're using now, right?
Zoom did quite well out of it.
Yeah. I mean, I heard of Zoom before pandemic, but quite frankly, like today is my daily, tool and application. So obviously the COVID pandemic really accelerated in general, the digital transformation. And therefore we have now a much bigger increase of, not just work remote, tools to work remotely, but also digital payments, for example. Now, all of this is a fantastic opportunity for hackers, because we can see like the level of certain practice or malpractice, like phishing, for example, went up really to the roof. And Italy, by the way, is one of the countries which has been most affected. I don't know whether we believe more in people, trust people more, so we click on links. I don't know what it is, but definitely we really one of the countries which has been affected the most. But even malware, there is a research that shows that malware during pandemic increased by 230% in Europe. So you can appreciate how big is the problem. And this, we're talking about across all Europe. But one thing that is for sure is going to stay is that we're going to work remotely for quite a while, probably forever. And there is a research that says that 89% of people will actually continue to have a little hybrid work environment. So all of those tools, they expose us to risks. And so we are looking at, obviously, as I said before, about protecting the digital identity of a person, which has different touch points, because you have your digital identity, like your data, your pictures, your privacy, your profile. And this is more important, I would say, appealing for young consumers. So that's how we talk to them, and our product will have a specific, I would say, we twist the product to be really kind of a protection for social media. And then we have for, more seasoned consumers, more the banking side and the fraudulent payments and credit cards or payments system. So this is more for a different audience, but we're still searching. I mean, we haven't finished yet. That's just the beginning of a journey, because then you can think about, your connected home security. You can think about your keyless car security. You can think about a lot of other applications that we're still in the process of, researching.
The stuff about, the personal cyber, the policies, I think I wouldn't have even considered like 2 years ago. Even for someone that's really exposed, because I use technology. I've worked from home for I've worked from home before it was cool. I worked from home for about 8 years, and on and off, or flexible working, and had office space. So I rely on digital connectivity, and so. But I just think it's my mind has shifted because I'm so aware now of the risk. Obviously, it doesn't help that I do a podcast talking about risk and insurance, and so therefore your exposure to it. But I definitely think even someone that knew the industry, I would not have taken it up. But now I'm looking at getting my own personal cyber cover because of the impact on my life. I'm probably in the older category. I'm probably more worried about kind of like banking and transactions and all of that sort of stuff. But then I do worry about reputational risk, which is something I'd never kind of worried about before. I'm still that generation. I'm so pleased that I don't have social media from my early 20s, and like, the pictures I'm glad don't exist in the world.
But the reputation can be a big risk. It can be also financial damage, like for people exposed and people who works with social media, for example. This is obviously influencers, or I'd say, in general, the more social community is really exposed, and that's why we're looking at those trends as well. And what is interesting is about new trends that we are obviously starting. We're looking at metaverse, we're looking at artificial intelligence. Is that the combination of those technologies that really can create a completely different level of category, which is really kind of putting your identity at risk, but your deep identity. So really, like with deep fakes, they're now really accurate, like totally accurate. There was a very interesting case where a deep fake was run through a banking system to authorize an incredibly high amount of, wire transfer. Wow. And that was lost forever. And it was a voice deep fake.
Wow.
So, you think you're safe if your bank will call you to double check that it's really you, and you really want to, do that wire transfer. But then you realize that this can be hacked as well.
I got a call from a bank actually this week because I'm moving house. We've talked about mortgages and stuff, and they did the classic thing: they phone you and have to run you through security. But because the process is not the same for every financial institution, you suddenly go, I've answered all these questions, but this could be someone hacking me.
Maybe I gave all my data to somebody.
Yeah, they're just going, I'll answer all these questions. So thankfully it was my bank, but I was thinking, well, these are the questions I would ask if I was trying to hack you anyway. I'm scaring myself now. Just double check it was my bank. Something I meant to ask, because I've not asked about distribution. What's the distribution model via brokers? Is it direct to consumer? How's the distribution handled?
Well, we are primarily focused on the B2B2C type of. Yep. Those are not products which are, let's say, you're going to look for maybe at some point after sure. The awareness will be there, and after we have more education about those risks, which is part of our mission, by the way. And I really believe this is also, I'd say, part of the social mission of an insurance, right? Is just to make people aware of the risk, not just about selling products in the first place. But obviously, we also, we know that those are products that they are more, I'd say, attached to other main products. So that is the main strategy, is to, go sell the products through other channels, and primarily other, I'd say, traditional channel for insurance, like brokers or bank insurance, or what we call affinity channels. So other businesses like telco or device producer, which might have an appetite for, offering something to their users and consumers to enhance, in a sense, their protection. And it's a sort of a win-win if you think about, because if you use your application and the technology you're selling a safer way, then even the producer of that technology will kind of have a little more reputational profile, or in general will have a better, I'd say, customer experience. So that's the way we primarily want to sell. We're sure. Going to have like a direct to consumer feature, like it's going to be online on a website, but we don't think this is going to be, at least for now, is not going to be the main
Yeah, it's too difficult distribution channel, especially at the early stages, I'd imagine. I final question, really conscious of your time. So, obviously you work a lot with third-party tech businesses, collaboration with like advanced sensor data, biometric data. I know this is a particular area of expertise for you. I kind of wanted to sort of, put your future thinking hat on, and are there really some particularly exciting innovations at the moment that you're conscious of in the third-party supplier space?
Yeah, so what I was mentioning earlier, we are really looking at a couple of things at the moment, for new waves of products. So not something that will go online in 2022, probably not even in 2023. Is the whole virtual reality metaverse. We think that this is very interesting because, as we said, they can expose us, and we tested ourselves. So one of the key things that we have to do is test ourselves, what the technology is about. So we had our the first Italian board meeting on a metaverse. So we had our clothes on, we were completely in different rooms. And I have to say that it was impressive how immersive is the virtual reality, and the fact that it's much more interactive compared to the Zoom. Because in the Zoom call, you don't see a person in his eyes, you look at your camera. So it's very difficult to make sure you have eye contact. In the metaverse, interesting enough, you do have eye contact. I personally experienced a eye contact. So it's completely different. Obviously, there are risks associated with, the identity of a person on the metaverse, the wallets on the metaverse that can be, again, stolen. There are already several cases. There is also, I would say, a more health-related type of risk associated with the loss of, I would say, sense of reality. And quite frankly, which you can have if you use it for many, many hours a day. So we're studying all of this. The other trend that we're looking at is robotic. So, and this is fascinating because, we used to think of robots as, the future, cleaning lady in our house that will make the coffee for us in the morning, which, by the way, I love it. But I think we're far from there. But what is interesting is that robots are basically like drones or other applications. They are really in our life today. And so we are looking at what are the risks associated with the robotic in general, which might be hurtful, might hurt somebody, might be hacked, might be stealing information. And again, we experiment quite a lot in robotics as well. But that's for like 2 to 5 years more type of products. But it's really fascinating. And this is how, this is really the interesting part, is that we are partnering with companies which are also developing those applications. So that's the interesting bit.
Yeah, I'm sort of picturing Wallife as just the office is just lots of people playing with VR machines and robots and then being paid to do it. That sounds
it is. We have our robot dog. I can tell you, we have a lot of we test things ourselves because I think it's always interesting to have a first-hand experience before. Sure. Obviously, it's not that part of it. It's just part of also for us to understand a little bit better, but obviously then we hand over to the team, and they're going to deep dive on the research as well.
I just had this thing of my remote team, and I'm not going to get us an office. I'm just going to send everyone an Oculus Rift headset, and we can just do a couple of hours a day working together. But I think we'd lose touch with reality. That would be the thing. So yeah,
it is a risk, to be honest. But I have to, it is a risk. But I think after I tried, I think it's also it's much more collaborative than to be on Zoom. And one of the key things is that you cannot look at your phone. So you totally committed to what you're doing. Sure. And so counterintuitively, you lose reality, but you actually gain focus. So it's interesting.
I'm gonna have to give it a go. Maria, you've been really generous with your time. Thank you so much. I genuinely think it's a fascinating business, and the sort of true edge of innovation in insurtech. So I want to thank you for being a guest on the podcast, and I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with next.
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting me.
You're welcome.